Well, once again, the election is over, and we've got our new governor-elect, lieutenant governor-elect, and attorney general-elect, and an entire new slate in the House of Delegates. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for our part 2 of our 2025 Virginia Election Talkback Show. That's right. We once again thank you for joining us, as you always do, as we broadcast from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. For all of you that have been joining us for this election series show, we are just grateful to close it out as far as the results go. This is our part 2 of our discussion of the election itself and taking a look and breaking down the results. You know, I've done a series of course, pre-election shows and election day of, and now I'm doing a series of talkbacks, looking at what actually took place, analyzing it, and delving in and looking at what's next for 2026 and the upcoming administration for the governor herself. Joining me to have this discussion is none other than my good friend, no stranger to this station, my guy, my brother from another mother, none other than Dr. Will LaVeist, award-winning journalist, and definitely one of the favorite sons of 757. Will, how you feel today?
Excellent. Dr. LaVille, always a pleasure to be with you, brother.
Absolutely. And listen, for those that are listening, Will LaVeist is joining us all the way from Israel. So he's over in the country of Israel right now.
Quite an experience. Quite an experience. We'll have to have a conversation about it for sure. Quite an experience.
Absolutely. But listen, if you're wondering how far does Stay the Water go, right? Where we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to the community, it's international. We've got our guest, Will LaVeist, over in the country of Israel right now, who is going to help us continue to break this down. We had an invigorating, enthusiastic, and very interesting conversation last week as we started to break down the results and talk about everything, not just the historic nature of the election itself, and then the issues that were on the ballot and what was happening. Now we're going to continue that conversation because we didn't get a chance to cover it all. Because, again, there's so much to cover and uncover as well. As we mentioned before, we have a new governor, and we talked about the Democratic tsunami. We looked at the results, the impact, and today we're going to talk about the MAGA backlash, or is it a Democratic New Deal? Also, what is the plan of action or game plan that should be for this new administration? And not only that, what did Virginians vote for? And before we talk about that, we're also going to discuss the impact of the shutdown. Now, we talked about the impact of DOGE and the job cuts and so forth, and its impact on Hampton Roads, but I want to talk about now the impact of the governmental shutdown. We know that it ended. Of course, the bill was signed, and there was a lot to uncover in that. We're going to talk about that in the next show of the Clavier Report. Join us at 12:30 as we break down what's in the bill and for ending the government shutdown and the impact that it's having. Will you see benefits now? When will government get back to normal, if it is? But we're going to talk about that at 12:30. But Will, just your take on just these last 43 days of the shutdown, and what do you think was the impact on this Virginia election?
Well, I think the fact that you're doing this is just excellent work because it's so important. Voting is so important that you focus on what's happening locally in terms of in your state and in your city. And we're seeing the impact of your local legislators for Congress, your local congressmen and women, how they can have an impact on the federal level. And so that's a lot of what this whole government shutdown was really about. It's about the people who you voted in Congress as senators and House of Representatives, and their inability to legislate, in a way that doesn't harm the people. So the fact that this shutdown has ended, you're absolutely right. It's ended, but the impact is going to continue to linger. And, the impact has been tremendous for people in their pocketbooks. And that's one of the reasons why, the pressure rose along with the election results. It was part of that pressure that rose that has led to the shutdown being over temporarily. Because, as you're going to talk about in much more detail, the bill as signed is only good until January of next year.
Yeah, at the very least, there's not everything was actually in that particular bill that they got. The question is, did the Democrats give up? Did they get enough and all that? But like I said, we're going to expound upon that in 12:30 in the next show. But the other part of this is really when we talk about the impact of the shutdown. We're talking about kitchen table politics, right? Kitchen table politics is nothing about political theory. It's nothing about political strategy. It's about, in the words of the Raging Cajun James Carville from back home, it's the economy, stupid. In other words, am I getting a paycheck today? Now, Will, if you don't get a paycheck, there's some calls being made to HR, right? If the deposit don't hit, did something happen? That happened for millions of federal workers, also our soldiers serving in harm's way, still on those ships, still on the battleground, on the battlefield, but not getting paid. So, when you talk about, kitchen table politics, it's do I have money? And who's to blame for me not having money?
Right, and the point that a lot of people don't have 6 months or 9 months worth of savings where they can afford and hang in there to go without a paycheck every 2 weeks. So this is really major pain caused unnecessarily because of congressmen who were, by the way, getting paid throughout all of this. Their inability to legislate properly, and that's why it's for anybody who's out there talking about voting doesn't really matter, is rigged, and so forth and so on. This should be showing you. This should be proof enough for you to realize that your vote does in fact matter. Notice you haven't heard any cries about voter improprieties or the big steal or any of these kinds of things, right? And you're seeing all of this maneuvering going on around gerrymandering there in Texas and in California, the vote that went through. So it's proof. It's telling people, anybody who has been saying, voting doesn't really matter, what's going on is showing you that it does absolutely matter, and you got to pay attention and you got to vote intelligently.
Absolutely. And then when you talk about voting, itself, look at the historic margins of victory for this election. 15 percentage points in the gubernatorial, 11 in the LG, and 7 in the attorney general. Historic, So when we talk about vote matters, votes do matter. But after you vote, now it's time for action. So we heard the stump speeches, we saw the commercials, people got to the polls, but what do you think the people of Virginia were really voting for?
I think the people of Virginia are voting for opportunity for their children, opportunity for themselves, for those who have children, and all adults, opportunities for themselves to live life and pursue happiness, unabated, and I think that they that's very much tied to the pocketbook. So, in the prior election and the general election, in the direction that it went, people heard what was said and people were looking at what happened in the previous administration and decided, hey, I'm going to go in this direction because I think the Republicans and I think Donald Trump, that they're going to be better for the economy. And I think that what people are seeing, they ignored a lot of what was actually said and what he said he was going to do. They ignored the things that didn't make sense to them because they were hanging on the promise that it would actually be better for the economy and that the new Congress coming in would be better for the economy. Well, now they've seen, no, that has not been the case. So I think that's what they voted for. They voted for, no, we're going in a different direction. And I think, like I've said before, the Democrats should not make the mistake to think that they voted for the Democrats.
Right.
That's what I think is important to understand. And people in Virginia and other places that say, well, I'm voting for the Democrats. No, they said we're voting in the opposite direction of where we're going. Just like I think that's how they voted before. That led to where we're at now. We need to vote in the opposite direction of where, because we don't like the way things are going. I think when you talk about taking, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. So you're saying that people voted for, it was a MAGA backlash as opposed to a vote for Democrats?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I think. Absolutely. Because I think that is the mistake that is often made on the left. The left has a good understanding of what the problems are and the issues are. But when it comes to execution and policies that actually make life better for people, that's when administration after administration has fallen short in many ways. And so I think that's what led to the attraction to MAGA. So now we're looking at a MAGA backlash. We're looking at that's not the direction we want to go. And so I think that politicians, and again, you're talking to an independent. You're talking to somebody who's not married to either party. I'm focused on, and I get excited about politicians who really intend to go in and do what is best for the people, regardless to what color they're wearing. And so that's what I'm looking for. That would be my advice. You've gotten into office. Now, what action are you going to actually take to make life better for the people?
Yeah. It's Save the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for part 2 of our 2025 Virginia Election Talkback series. Here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have elected a historic slate of statewide offices and also another historic slate in the House of Delegates. We have our first woman governor-elect, who will be the next governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, is Governor-elect Spanberger, the first Muslim representative that will be a lieutenant governor, Senator Hashmi, and also the first black Attorney General, Jay Jones, as Attorney General-elect. And yes, the House of Delegates have a supermajority, 64 seats in the House of Delegates, up from 51. That's plus 13. And Legislative Black Caucus of Virginia gained 5 additional members for a historic 37 total within the caucus. Again, that's 37 out of 140 seats in the House of Delegates and the Senate, making it 140 for the General Assembly. Historic election within itself. What does this mean for Virginia? What did the Virginians vote for? MAGA backlash or the Democratic New Deal? And what about the economy? Well, when we talked last week, we talked about a Democratic tsunami. So it wasn't just Virginia that night, but also New Jersey elected a female Democrat who, ironically, went to Congress at the same time as our governor-elect, and they were roommates on the Hill as well. So how ironic is that? Also, in New York City, they elected what is deemed a socialist Democrat-socialist, however you want to phrase it, in Mayor Moondani. And also across the United States, in California, Proposition 50. Proposition 50 itself was accepted by the voters in order to give California the power to redraw their congressional lines off cycle in response to the White House pressuring the states like Texas, also Indiana, North Carolina, and Missouri to do the same in order to buffet against Democratic gains in the midterm elections in 2026. Well, a lot of moving parts, a lot going on. When we talk about the Democratic tsunami, like we said, it's just not about, political strategy, but it's about kitchen table politics. Do you think the country, you mentioned a MAGA backlash, what about the MAGA backlash not only has Virginians, but New Jersey and New York and California?
Yeah, I would even qualify it as saying that MAGA is having a MAGA backlash. Because if you notice that there are a lot of people who were really loyal to the MAGA movement, and however you want to characterize that as it is, who are now looking at Trump and saying that he hasn't been loyal and he hasn't been delivering on what he promised, because he talked very much about America First agenda, right? So if you look within those ranks, they are having a backlash and starting to say, well, I tolerated some of the things that you said that didn't make sense, and we didn't believe you were going to do, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But now you not even being loyal to what you said you were going to do, and we see you taking advice and being in a bubble and taking advice from all of these billionaires who are you meeting with at Mar-a-Lago. So again, I think when people look carefully at what is actually going on and what some folks are saying, you might be on different ends of the political spectrum or the racial spectrum or the class spectrum, right? But what a lot of people are really looking for is, I want to be able to buy a house. I want to be able to have a reasonable mortgage. I don't want gimmicks like, a 50-year mortgage and all of these different things. I want to have a shot at the American dream. And I think that there are people on the so-called MAGA side and as well as on the so-called progressive side that share that same goal. And whoever, is tolerable to whatever they dislike, but is able to hone in on that message and deliver on those promises, I think is going to have a winning strategy. And I think that you're starting to see some of that with Mandami, for example, because you would have never thought that someone that comes right out and say, I'm a democratic socialist, and take all of these darts and arrows, being called a communist and all of that. And people said, no, I'm not listening to the rhetoric. I'm listening to what he's saying about what he's trying to do and what he wants to see happen to make New York more affordable, And New York, because I'm a New Yorker, as you well know, rent control has been a feature of New York life and living in Manhattan for decades, for generations. So if you want to call that socialism, well, that's been around, as an example, that's been around the greatest city, the greatest capitalistic city in America. That's been the case. So some of the things he's talking about, these are things that are already in place, and people know that, right? They know he's not talking about changing New York into, Moscow. They know that. It's how you're going to make this city more affordable. And people, I believe, are starting to look at what are folks actually saying and what is the likelihood of them actually delivering on what they say.
Will, when you talk about affordability and you look at cities like New York, the country in San Francisco, for example, in California, cities are becoming more and more unaffordable. However, the wealthy are getting wealthier. The super rich are getting super richer.
Absolutely.
And the stock market is off the charts. That level of income inequality, and again, we're not talking about everyone being super rich or everyone being super wealthy, but we're talking about living wages. In other words, being able to afford where you live, being able to eat where you live, being able to buy gasoline, groceries, and the like where you live, and go to the school of your choice where you live, and with a reasonable budget. But the affordability is simply out of reach for a lot of people. And to your point, voters were looking at the kitchen table politics with this. So when you take a look at what the president, again, there was a lot of optimism with making America great again. A lot of people bought into that vision, bought into the rhetoric, bought into, the promise of a better America for them based upon what the president said he would do. They bought into it hook, line, and sinker. And it looks like a lot of those individuals thought that the bad part of the administration was going to fall on other people. However, it shows that whether you're poor or whether you are middle class or working class, no matter what color you are, it affects all of us with those policies. Well, there was a lot of gimmicks taking place. 50-year mortgage. You and I, we chuckled about that because I said 50 years. I said, basically, that's like paying rent for life.
Exactly, it's paying rent, and man, it's hard to even take this thing seriously. It's like mortgage. If you hear mortgage, you're already hearing the root word, mortician, mortuary, right? Mortgage. It's something that you already is built in for you to be tied into for life, and never pay off. If you stretch it out over 50 years, man, all you're going to be paying is the interest, and that thing will never get paid off. And then when it comes time for you to sell it, you're hoping it appreciates in its value. Right. Come time for you to sell it, you're still going to owe a tremendous amount of money off. You may not even be able. You still may be underwater. So that's what people are facing when you talk about unaffordability. That's Northern Virginia. For years it used to be Northern Virginia was okay. It was more expensive up there than in the coastal Virginia or Western Virginia. Okay, but it's still, if you were making a good upper middle class income, hey, you can still do well in Northern Virginia. But now it's getting to the point where Northern Virginia is becoming like San Francisco or like New York. So people are seeing this and they're not buying it. And, with all of the government job losses, you talk about homes for sale, you're going to see there's going to be a fair amount of homes for sale and foreclosures going on in Northern Virginia. And it's sad.
Yeah. And then on top of that, just to placate voters and Americans, he talked about $2,000 to each American for tariff dividend. But Secretary of Treasurer kind of had different thoughts about that. Are these and then, of course, this was not a document or a memorandum on official letterhead, but rather a post on Truth Social, which is the new platform he uses. It was Twitter, but now it's Truth Social. Our president continues to legislate from social media.
And social media and platforms that he owns.
Right.
Interestingly, he continues to legislate and do things that very much benefit him business wise. His cryptocurrencies and so forth. His library, his planned presidential library, all these lawsuits, raising money for his libraries. And again, people see, the elaborate redesign that he's doing there in the White House. And like, you're spending all this money and then you're laying people off, firing people. By the way, wasn't there no bid contract? There wasn't any bid on that contract, was it, to do any construction at the White House, right? People are seeing these things, and I'm hopeful that we'll continue to not turn a blind eye to it, that the election is a sign of, no, we're not turning a blind eye to this madness.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, when we talk about affordability, CNN has an article that says, it's entitled, "The Affordability is in Crisis. The Solution, You'll Never Own Anything Again." Again, referencing the 50-year mortgage and also the cost of affordability. So once again, this is an issue that we believe that voters were actually looking at and they were voting on. Now, we know Virginia was a local election, meaning a local statewide election, and you voted for local officials to represent you in Richmond. However, it had national implications. It was the very first election always after the presidential election. We are the cardinal in the coal mine, pun intended. And the way Virginia goes, so does the rest of the country. So, Will, let's talk about 2026.
Okay.
Is this a picture of 2026 in what we have moving forward across the country? Because now we are going to elect, of course, there are going to be more states on the ballot for referendums. There are going to be congressional seats up with the redrawing. We'll talk about it in a moment. But also Congress itself. Will districts kick out Republicans?
I think so. I think, again, the mindset will be, look at who's in power. Things are not working for me. We need an alternative. Who is the alternative? What are they saying? Are they authentic? Can they be trusted to actually execute on what they promise? And I think people are going to be looking at that. So, for example, you're going to be talking more in the latest show about the bill that was passed that, ended the government shutdown. Well, there's a health care crisis looming in terms of the health care costs, right? And then also the policies that these bills, well, the big, beautiful bill, that those policies will at some point start kicking in, right? And so if the economy, let's say by the summer or so, the economy is not in better shape, if health care costs have skyrocketed and things are actually getting worse, there's absolutely no doubt that the midterm elections in November, that this is just going to be the start of, you call it a tsunami. This is going to be torrential rain, tsunami, hurricane, all of that, all of the above.
But Will, even with that, there are high expectations for voters. All right, we got you in office, make it better. Again, if you're sick, it takes time to get well. And I think that's one of the messages that the Democrats, if they win power back, have to convey to the American people. And they also have to point out the germ, the boogeyman. What made you sick in the first place? And and when we talk about what voters voted for, the governor-elect message was a unification. That was a central theme throughout other accept victory speeches. But there are some voters on the Democratic side that want accountability. They want retribution. They want individuals to know that Republicans did this to make your lives worse, and we want you held accountable for that. What does that look like, and is that feasible in this Democratic Party that we have now?
Retribution, I don't think that's in the DNA of the party, that kind of, to the extent of what you see going on in Republicans. I think that's one of the Achilles heels that the Democratic Party is weak on when it comes to really playing hardball politics, really making people accountable for the wrongs that they've done. So I don't see that. I could be wrong, but I don't see that. And my concern is that folks will get into office and we'll see more of the same old posture. Again, Democrats have a way of knowing what should be done and speaking well to the issues, but when it comes to really making tough decisions, to really being, laser focused or making kind of change, transformative change, I think in recent years that hasn't really been a hallmark of the Democratic Party. I just don't. I think you got to go back maybe that back to FDR or something in the New Deal, to say the way you see that. Maybe not that far. Maybe civil rights movement, LBJ, even though a lot of that was nonpartisan. A lot of that was both parties really recognizing what was best interest in the country, So, no, I don't see them playing hardball like that. I just don't. But I think if they execute on what's promised, then maybe they won't have to.
Absolutely.
But people should be held accountable for the wrongs that they do. Absolutely.
Well, we'll see what happens, but definitely a message of unification. Pragmatism over partisanship is what we'll see. I think they're going to go the way of Tim Kaine and how he voted for this deal to open, which we'll talk more about at 12:30. So make sure you tune back in. But we'll let you have the last word on this as we close out this election wrap up and we get into, the policy part and we get into what's going to happen moving forward. What are your expectations for this administration? And what if they ask you, they say, well, LaVeist, give us one thing that you think we should do. What would it be?
Well, I think that they should be honest and do what's in the best interest of all of the people. And, when you decide that this is the direction that you're going to go and you make promises on what you're going to execute on, you should do it, as opposed to just making policies or taking actions that benefit your individual self and your individual, donors, so forth. I think they really need to put forth some policies going to be in the best interest of the people.
Absolutely. Well, we do know one thing, that we are Virginians, and we will continue to be Virginians and work together and make sure that we do the very best for the Commonwealth. Once again, we want to thank you for joining us, as you always do, as we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to the community. Will, thank you for joining us from Israel. Safe travels back to the U.S. And
appreciate you, bro.
Absolutely. Hopefully get you back on the show soon to talk about your travels. Until next time, be good, be great. God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.